Welcome to Securing America with me, Frank Gaffney, the program that's a kind of owner's manual for protecting the country we love against all enemies, foreign and domestic, to the glory of God and his kingdom. I had the chance to meet recently a man who I thought had a very interesting insight into one of the problems that we have, well, with the dangers to our country internally that does not get as much attention as it requires, and certainly is not seemingly on the agenda for corrective action as it should be. I think it's best described as the administrative state, a means by which we have a kind of permanent bureaucracy really running much of the country year after year after year, mostly unseen, certainly unaccountable. And our guest, Stephen Hecht, has a fascinating story to tell about an example, a microcosm, really, of this larger problem that has not only been, I think, dangerous for our own country here at home, but it has definitely complicated and, I would argue, undermined our foreign policy interests in a very important part of the world. Again, often neglected, but it's truly our front yard. Some say it's our backyard. I call it our front yard, namely Latin America. Steve Hecht is a businessman originally from New York City who moved to Guatemala about 50 years ago and has been doing business there and watching closely, particularly for the past decade or so, what the State Department of the United States has been doing to and in Guatemala. And he has been writing, I think, quite prolifically and impressively about what he's been seeing on the ground and what its implications are, not just for the people and nation of Guatemala, but for us as well. Stephen Hecht, it's great to have you with us, sir. Welcome, and thank you for taking a full hour of your time to tell us a bit about this story, both interesting in its own right, of course, but as kind of a cautionary tale about the larger problem we're facing. We're delighted to have you at Securing
Well,
America.
thank you very much, Frank. It's a pleasure to be with you. Your introduction was very kind and very accurate, and I'm happy to be with you to talk about these things.
Good. Well, let's start with just a sort of overview of the problem of the administrative state, and then we'll get into some of the particulars. Some have called it the deep state, particularly during the Trump years, where it was clear that a lot of those bureaucrats were resisting the duly elected president of the United States. We've seen some horrors associated with all of that, but characterize the problem as you see it at the macro level.
Well, the people of the United States, we the people, elect our representatives. And according to the Constitution, the president leads the executive branch. But if the president doesn't execute policies that the administrative state likes, they undermine him. And we can see that clearly in the Trump administration. And Guatemala is a perfect example of that. From Obama to Trump to Biden, State Department policy in Guatemala hasn't changed. Now, we can all imagine that Obama and Biden are in agreement with what the State Department is doing in Guatemala, but Trump certainly wasn't. But what could he do about it? Oh, theoretically, he could do a lot about it, but considering that that's just one country in the world, probably it wasn't high enough up on his priority list to get to. So, why
Right.
should we?
And frankly, even things that were high on his priority list, he couldn't get much done over the administrative state. So let's turn to Guatemala as an example of this larger problem. An unaccountable bureaucracy that does not want to do necessarily uh, what's in the interest of the United States, but has its own interests. How would you characterize, going back to the Obama years under Hillary Clinton, most especially, were the perceived interests of the State Department in Guatemala?
They, in that case, the executive and the State Department seemed to be in perfect harmony. And Hillary Clinton instructed her ambassador to pressure the Guatemalan authorities to remove a duly appointed and very good attorney general. He spent 17 days in office, and the high court there removed him. Uh, they actually annulled the process that had brought him to the office, and they did it in an illegal manner so that they would open it up for Hillary Clinton's chosen attorney general, a woman named Claudia Paz Paz, and she committed horrible crimes in Guatemala in that post.
Okay, well, we got to back the lens up here because it's a relatively small
Right.
country, albeit in an important part of the world, one that we generally neglect. And you're saying that the Secretary of State of the United States, wife of the former President of the United States, former Senator from New York, then the Secretary of State, had as a priority removing an attorney general of this little country of Guatemala and bent the resources and efforts of her department towards accomplishing that. This sounds a little incredible, I have to say, Steve. What's the backstory?
Yeah, it does sound incredible. I mean, I found it incredible myself. And so I and another American friend visited the U.S. ambassador at the time, Arnold Chacon, and we briefed him for about an hour and a half on the criminality of this Attorney General Paz Paz. And after that, what I know, and we provided documentary proof, by the way. And after that, the support for her was just obvious when her term ended and she came up for a reappointment, which she was eligible for. Uh, the ambassador made a video with the U.S. flag and his seal, and he said it was an honor to work with such an honest public servant. And by that time, he absolutely knew of her crimes.
Okay, but let's again back the lens up just a little bit. What was wrong with the man who had been initially appointed to be Attorney General that Hillary Clinton saw fit to remove? And maybe you should say a little bit about the politics of Guatemala at the time. Who was president? Who was appointing this Attorney General? And what was the
Okay,
problem with
well,
him?
uh, there was nothing wrong with that attorney general. And the only thing wrong with him was he wasn't Claudia Paz Paz, and she had not put her papers in. Any attorney who has the qualifications can. I mean, I can present my papers, but I'm not Guatemalan, I'm not an attorney, but anybody can present their papers, and if they qualify, if they meet the legal qualifications, then they're considered in the process. She hadn't applied to that process, and apparently they saw her as what they wanted. Now the overview is Guatemala had a long, what they call internal armed conflict. Actually, it was an invasion by Fidel Castro's chosen. Well, they were Guatemalans, but Fidel Castro was supporting communist guerrillas to violently overthrow the government of Guatemala, and they failed to do that. And they failed because
But not for want of trying, I
no,
think is the point. And maybe we could talk. We have to take a short break here. Stephen Hecht is our guest. We're talking about an extraordinary story that he's lived through in Guatemala of American governmental interference in its internal affairs, which has been a permanent agenda, it seems, of the permanent bureaucracy in the State Department. And we're going to talk more about why that's so important right after this.